Welcome to the second part of my grain tutorial series. Now in this part, I'm going to show you a more advanced emulation of film grain. If you haven't seen the first part, there is a link in the description and hopefully something will pop up in this video and go check that out. But if you've done so, then this is where we left off and let's just continue. Okay, so as I mentioned in this video, I'm going to talk about more advanced features of grain. Now, one of the more advanced features is that it varies in size. So in the last video, I layered certain grains, which is just good for an overall look, and that works as well if you want to be quite quick. But if you want to emulate film grain, you need to vary the size of the grain particles according to your to the tonality of your images. Now that's what I'm going to show you how to do, and also the opacity and the transparency of the grain is going to have to be kind of the same in a way that it needs to mimic the tonality of your images. Okay, so that's basically what we're going to do. But first, I think I'm just going to delete this grain that we created last time, but I'm going to leave the gradient map. And you know what, I'm just going to merge it down so that it will not cause any problems. I just want to stay with the black and white because then we have nothing else to worry about, just tones. We have no color. And also, you know, grain looks really good on black and white. So before we can get into the blending of the grain, we need to understand how the blending that we're going to use works. So for that, I actually want to create a gradient. Now this is just for demonstrational purposes, so you don't have to do the same thing. Let me just go like that. Okay, 0. I just actually want to do that. Okay, so once again, this is just for demonstrational purposes. This is not for the whole tutorial. So anyway, let me just create a new solid color. Let's just, a non-invasive, non too harsh red is what I chose. And here's the thing. Let's blend this color according to the tones of this gradient. Now, the way you do that is not with the blending mode, and the way you do that is not with the, the luminosity masks, but it is by using blending options. So if you right click and go into blending options, you have this panel where you can find this blend if category. Now at the blend if category, you can basically say the following. And keep in mind, we're going to use the underlying layer and the gray for now. Okay, so if I start moving this triangle, the left one, what I'm basically saying to Photoshop is that, let's go to, let's say 30, here is the value. So 29, it's really difficult to get to 30. Okay, 30. So what it says is that if where the underlying layer is darker than 30, that's where I want to make my current layer completely transparent. And now I can do that with the other side as well. So if I just drag it here, and then it says that wherever the underlying layer is brighter than 200, then that's where I want to make this current layer completely transparent. Now, obviously, the problem with this is that you can see that the fall off is quite harsh. It's really, really harsh, and I want it to be smoother. I don't want this ridiculously harsh line here. I want to have a gradient there, basically. And you can do that with a blend if. You just need to hold down Alt or Option on the Mac, and you can split these triangles. So let's just start with the darker values. So you can see that if I split these, it's just going to create a gradient, and I can make them smoother. I can make this gradient smoother and smoother by varying the distance between these half triangles, basically. And I can do the same thing on the other side, so holding down Alt or Option on the Mac, and I can basically make this, as you can see, quite smooth. And I can hit OK, and the really nice part about this is I can jump back into it by double clicking or right clicking, but I like double clicking, and then I can modify it again so it's completely non-destructive. So this is what we are going to use for what is that? For grain. Okay, so let me just delete that. All right, so I don't think we need the gradient fill anymore, so I'm just going to delete that as well. And let's just zoom in to 100% because that's how it's advised to deal with grain, because now I can take it all in. If I just do that, it's not going to be too nice or too helpful. And if I zoom out, it's really hard to see. So 100% for now, and you can zoom out later. It's completely up to you though. Okay, so just like last time, I'm going to create a new empty layer. And that new empty layer, I'm going to fill by holding down Shift and plus F5, which is going to bring up the fill dialog. And I want to fill the contents with 50% gray and hitting OK. Now with that, I want to put this blending mode of the layer to soft light, okay? Now that it's soft light, it's completely transparent, just like in the previous video. And now you want to go into filter filter noise and add noise. And we are going to stay with 15%. I think that's just fine. Okay, so we have a noise here. Now there are a couple of problems with this noise that I don't really enjoy. If I zoom in, and hopefully video compression gods will let you see it, but in these really, really dark areas, if not, then you have to take my word for it. So in these really, really dark areas, you see, or I see, or you trust me that I see, no grain. Because a soft light is not allowing it to show on the really, really dark areas. Now, the same is true for the light areas. So if I zoom in, there's this difference with this kind of grayish area and the very, very light area. I have absolutely no grain in this harsh highlight, which is not nice. I don't want that. So this is our first task. We need to create a very even grain layer that shows up everywhere. And then we can start manipulating it to our liking. Let me just get a sip of water here. Perfect. Okay. So now that I'm hydrated, we can continue. I think I'm going to start with the dark areas. Now, the reason I'm really zoomed in is because this grain is quite difficult to see. So I had to zoom in. Otherwise, 100% is a really good way to do that. Okay, let's create a new empty layer and name this dark area grain, okay? And the other one, let's midtone grain, okay? So the empty layer that says dark area grain, I want to fill that with black. Okay, it's completely black now. But if I change the blending mode to one of these, so light and screen, color dodge, linear dodge, or lighter color, let's just go with screen. It's basically going to any of those in the category is saying to Photoshop, well, anything that's completely black is going to be transparent. Okay, but we need to choose screen because we don't want Photoshop to manipulate the other values that are not black. So screen would be the nice choice. Now, going into filter, we actually have the choice to go back into noise and add noise again, or we can just go here and just use add noise again. And I'm just going to do that because I want to apply the same amount, then the same kind of noise into this. So add noise, that's it. Now it got really noisy, but it shows up in the dark area. So I'm really happy with that. However, I don't want it to show up anywhere else because that's making our image really noisy, okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to go into the blending options of this dark area grain. So double clicking, and let's manipulate the underlying layer. Now, I don't want it to show up anywhere where it's brighter. Let me see. Where it's brighter than, I think, something like 25, okay? But it's too harsh, so I want to split this. Let me just go up a bit, but down more. Okay, it's almost like maximum, yes. Okay, the other thing is that if you take a look, hopefully once again video compression allows, this grain, where we didn't apply the extra grain, is less grainy than the dark areas now. So we need to make that a bit, less visible than that. And to do that, I'm just basically going to hit OK, and I'm just going to lower the opacity in order to match the areas next to it. And I think for this image, let's go with 35. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, so this is the dark area grain. Now, what about the highlights? Well, it's quite easy. So again, creating a new empty layer. And this time we are going to fill it with the opposite, which is white. So once you fill that with white, we need to make that transparent somehow. But if I put it on soft light, you can see that it lightens the image. If I put it on screen, it's just going to say white. But if I go into multiply or any of the others in that category, that's going to be fine, because now we are transparent. But I would advise you to use multiply. Okay, so now we want to do the same, applying the same add noise, and there you go. Let me just rename this so that we have highlight grain, okay? Highlight grain, dark area grain, midtone grain. Okay, that's good. So what I want to do now is, let me just see. Yeah, it's really, really harsh. But first, we need to get rid of, because I turned on and off, it applies to the whole image. And once again, the same thing happens as with the dark areas. I don't want the image to be too grainy. I want it to, be contained where there are highlights. So double clicking. And now we're going to do the complete opposite using the underlying layer, starting from here and saying that, I think that's where I want to end it. So anything that's darker than 199 is going to be ignored and just completely turned into transparent. Okay, so that's it. But I still need to split it. So holding down Alt or Option, I'm just going to split it and just try to kind of blend it. And I think, okay, something like that. Hitting OK, and just remember, you can go into blending options anytime and modify that. That's the beauty of it, non-destructive. So what you need right now is it's too harsh compared to anything else. So once again, just opacity and just turning it down until I like what I see. Okay, on this one, I think 25 or 30 would be kind of equalized. Okay, let's zoom out. I think it's quite nice. Okay, so now that we have grain everywhere, every tone has grain in this image, we are going to do the following. Let's just select all of that and group them. And let's just call them, for now, dark grain, okay? Because what we want to do is we want to duplicate this, so duplicating it, the whole group, and call this light grain. Now, the dark grain we are going to apply to the darker areas, and the light grain is going to get applied to the lighter areas. For now, let's just turn off the visibility of the light grain. Okay, so you remember probably that at the beginning of the video, I told you that grain particles are larger in the darker areas of the image, and that's what we are going to simulate or emulate right now. Okay, so select the dark grain, which is still visible, and hit Ctrl+T or Command+T to free transform. Link the percentages, and let's just go for something like 160. Okay, so you can see that nothing changed because the blend if is non-destructive, so that's good, but we still have coverage, but it's just a bit bigger than the light grain that we just didn't touch for now, okay? And this is going to be the size of the particles in the darker areas. Now, what I need to do is eliminate any other grain on this dark grain group from the highlighted areas. It's quite simple, just the same method. Double click, because we can apply blend if to groups as well. Something to keep in mind though is that you can't really nest the groups and use underlying layers over and over again, okay, because of the nature of it. Okay, so now what I want to do is, let's see, let me just lower this down. Okay, I think this is, so I don't want anything that's brighter than 80 or 81 to show my bigger grain, okay? And let me just soften it. I'm probably going to go this way more than that way. Okay, not that one. Okay, sorry, this one. So just like that. Basically, I'm just playing around. Because each and every film stock is different, you have to dial it in either by, intuition or basically just by eye. So I'm going to hit OK because I like that. Now you can see that the highlight areas have no grain, but the darker ones, they do. Okay, so now I need to do kind of the opposite. So staying on 100%, I'm going to click the visibility on with the light grain, double clicking on that, and now I don't want that light grain to show up in the dark areas. I'm going to start doing this, and I don't even have to go that far. So let's just smooth it out like that. Yeah. I'm just trying to kind of eliminate the double grain, so I don't want it to really double grain me somewhere. However, the good thing about this method is that if we have a bit of an overlap, that's just basically helping our emulation, because most film stock has more grain in the midtones, okay? So that's just nice. So now by hitting OK, you can see that we have grain in the highlight areas and we have grain in the dark areas. However, the grain is bigger in the darker areas than in the highlight areas or the lighter areas, okay? Now, the really amazing about this method is that I can even pre-transform the dark grain again, just like that, and 150, so making it even bigger. And that will not change anything because our blend if is set up in a way that it's completely non-destructive, okay? But let me just go back because this looks rubbish. But I like this ratio of bigger grain in the dark areas and smaller grain in the light areas. One more thing we need to do is we need to blur the lighter grain a bit, because if you take a look at this enlarged area, because we enlarged that grain, it became a bit blurry, and we need to match that. Okay, it's easier to match that, and it's better to match that than sharpening it and matching that to the lighter one, okay? So let's go into the light grain and the mid-tone grain, because that's going to be easy to control and see and find somewhere where it's kind of mid-tone gray. Okay, going into filter, blur, and Gaussian blur, and I already have it kind of dialed in, but let's just go for 25. Hit OK, and you can see that now it's kind of the same, but we need to apply it to all of these areas. So going into the dark area grain and just hitting Control+F, and then the highlight grain once again, Control+F. Okay, and now if I zoom in really, really well, you can see that it's completely homogeneous, and it's just, it's a good emulation. Okay. So you can just group these and just say this is your grain. Now, keep in mind you don't actually have to always go through the trouble of setting these layers up, because you can use an action and you can create an action out of all of this. In fact, most of the things that I frequently use, I create an action out of, because that's just going to speed up my workflow, and that's essential for me as a post-production artist. So also, the other thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to always be this detailed, okay? You can just sometimes just use the first method I showed you in part 1, or you can just use even just one simple grain layer. You don't even have to layer it. But if you want to emulate it, which is extremely difficult in Photoshop and extremely difficult in digital, you need to use algorithms, because the method I showed you is not based on any algorithm. It's just a perceptual kind of intuitive way of gauging how grain works, But you can shoot a couple of grainy film film frames, and then you can just take a look at that, how the grain behaves, and you can emulate that with the same method, because once again you can extend these or expand these, and you can play around with the blend ifs and just and with the size and everything. So you can kind of be quite precise with this method. But anyway, it's your choice. Keep that in mind that these are just options, and what I showed you can be done quite differently and with different methods. Now, I hope you enjoyed this. It's quite long. I know it's quite dense, but with these advanced methods, you can just create so beautiful grain that will be hard to differentiate from real film grain. Now, if you like this video, just hit a thumbs up. I think that's what people say, and just share it if you think that it's useful for anyone, because hopefully that's what they are. These videos, they are hopefully useful. And just like before, until next time, see you later.